I could feel their eyes slicing through me long before the laughter started. It wasn't loud. It never is, not at first. It begins with a whisper, a smirk, and then the kind of chuckle that crawls under your skin. The bride's mother was the loudest among them, her wine glass shimmering as she tilted her head, pretending to whisper to the woman beside her. But I caught it. I caught every word. Oh dear, she actually wore that? I wish I could say I didn't care, that I was immune to the cruel theater of rich people pretending to be polite. But when you grow up measuring every dollar and every glance, you learn the weight of mockery, especially from people like her. It was my best friend's wedding, or at least that's what I thought she was. Emily and I had grown up together in the same small town. I was the girl from the wrong side of the tracks, and she was the mayor's daughter, bright, kind, and obliviously privileged. When she got engaged to Daniel, her college sweetheart, she asked me to be her maid of honor. I cried that day, not because I didn't see the imbalance in our lives, but because I believed she saw me, the real me, not the paycheck or the postcode. But standing there that afternoon, in that sprawling white marquee filled with chandeliers and chatter, I realized just how naive I'd been. Emily's mother, Mrs. Harrington, was the kind of woman who made compliments sound like accusations. Her voice always carried an edge, sweetened poison. I'd seen her glance at my thrift store handbags before, the subtle lift of her eyebrow when she noticed my shoes weren't designer. But that day, when I stepped out in the gown I had worked months to afford, she didn't hide her contempt. The dress wasn't flashy. It was a soft silver satin that shimmered faintly in the afternoon light, modest but elegant. I had found it in a small boutique downtown, a place run by an old woman who stitched dreams into fabric. I'd saved for months, skipping dinners, taking extra shifts, and selling a few of my sketches online to make it mine. To me, that dress wasn't just an outfit. It was proof that I belonged there, that I could stand beside Emily and not look out of place. But Mrs. Harrington didn't see effort. She saw threat. She saw a girl trying to step above her station. As I stood near the aisle, waiting for the ceremony to start, she sauntered over with a polished smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, sweetheart," she began, her tone dripping with feigned admiration. "That's quite a choice. I didn't know satin was back in style." Her friends snickered, hiding their smirks behind manicured hands. I forced a smile. "It's a classic," I replied, keeping my tone steady. But my heart thudded painfully. I could feel heat rise in my cheeks. The last thing I wanted was to cause a scene on Emily's day. "Oh, I'm sure it is," Mrs. Harrington said, tilting her glass toward me. "But I must say, the fabric looks a little stiff. Did you order it online?" That drew another round of laughter. I swallowed hard, my throat burning. For a moment, I almost turned away. But something in me, that quiet voice I'd learned to trust, whispered not today. Instead, I met her gaze and smiled faintly. "Actually, it's custom-made." Her laughter faltered just for a second. Then she shrugged. "Oh, darling, anyone can say that. The real test is in the label." And that's when I realized what she wanted, to humiliate me, to make me prove I didn't belong. But I didn't flinch. I simply said, "You'll see soon enough." As the ceremony began, I stood behind Emily, holding her bouquet as she took Daniel's hand. I watched her eyes glisten, her lips tremble with vows, and for a fleeting moment, the pain in my chest softened. She was happy. That's what mattered. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Yet as I looked around, at the polished guests, the glittering tables, the cameras flashing, I couldn't ignore how out of place I felt. The laughter from earlier clung to me like perfume gone sour. Every smile in the crowd seemed laced with judgment. Then, as if my thoughts had summoned her, Mrs. Harrington appeared again during the reception, her glass refilled, her eyes sharper. "You know, my dear," she said, placing a perfectly manicured hand on my arm, "you have such confidence wearing that dress. Not many people could pull it off." "Thank you," I said, my tone steady. She leaned in closer. "But maybe next time, something simpler would suit you better. Leave the high-end looks for those who can carry them." My smile didn't waver. "You mean those who can afford them?" She blinked, taken aback by my tone. The mask slipped, just for a second. Then she laughed. "Oh, don't be silly, dear. I just meant know your strengths." Those words stung more than I wanted to admit. I had spent years hearing variations of them from teachers, employers, even Emily's father when I once asked him for career advice. Know your place. That was what they all really meant. But the truth? I had known my place for too long. I had worked, scraped, and bled to climb out of it. And that dress, that one beautiful thing I owned, was the first time I'd ever worn my progress on my skin. Still, I didn't argue. I just smiled politely, letting her believe she'd won. Because I knew something she didn't. A flashback flickered in my mind, the night I bought the dress. It had been a rainy evening. The boutique owner, an older woman named Mrs. Lane, had been closing up when I walked in, drenched and shivering. I told her about my best friend's wedding, about how I wanted to wear something that made me feel worthy. She had listened quietly, her eyes soft. Then she went to the back and returned with the silver gown. "This one isn't on display," she said, brushing the dust off the fabric. "It was made by someone who doesn't sell her work anymore. Too many knockoffs. But it deserves to be worn by someone genuine." When I tried it on, I didn't see a dress. I saw my struggle stitched into every seam, the unpaid overtime, the rejections, the sleepless nights designing dreams I couldn't afford to chase. And when I looked at the label, I froze. It read, L. Caro Atelier. Lydia Caro, one of the most exclusive, elusive designers in the country. The kind whose gowns sold for 5 figures and graced red carpets. I asked Mrs. Lane if she was sure. She just smiled and said, she used to bring her early pieces here. Not everything that's priceless comes with a price tag. That night, I paid what I could and promised I'd make the dress mean something. Back in the present, I stood tall as Mrs. Harrington excused herself to mingle. I watched her glide across the ballroom, blissfully unaware of the storm quietly gathering. Because soon, her laughter would die in her throat, and it would only take a single glance at the label inside my dress. The memory of that night still lingers like perfume on a forgotten scarf, faint but impossible to erase. After Mrs. Harrington's cruel little performance at the wedding, I went home replaying every word, every laugh, every look. I told myself it didn't matter, that I shouldn't let her win, but my reflection in the mirror betrayed me. I saw the same old girl I used to be, the one who stood in discount store dressing rooms, pretending she didn't care about what she couldn't have. But this time it was different, because that dress wasn't just any dress. It was the one thing I'd promised myself after years of scraping by, something beautiful that was entirely mine. I had found it months before the wedding, while walking home from work one evening. The rain had just stopped, and the streetlights painted gold streaks across the wet pavement. I remember ducking under the awning of a small boutique, more to escape the drizzle than to shop. Inside, it smelled like lavender and fabric glue. Bolts of silk and lace lined the walls, each whispering stories of women who could afford them. I wasn't one of them, but still I wondered. That's when I saw it, tucked in the back corner, draped on a headless mannequin like a secret waiting to be discovered. The silver satin caught the faint light, soft and calm, not screaming for attention like the sequin gowns beside it. It was elegant in a quiet way confidence is, understated but sure of itself. I couldn't take my eyes off it. An older woman emerged from the back room. She had gentle eyes and hands that carried years of stitching experience. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said, her voice warm but knowing, as if she already sensed I couldn't afford it. I nodded, my throat tightening. "It's perfect. Would you like to try it on?" she asked. I hesitated, glancing at the price tag hanging delicately from the zipper. My stomach sank. It was more than my rent. "Oh, I'm just looking," I lied, turning away. But she smiled softly. "Humor me. No harm in seeing how something feels, right?" Something in her tone disarmed me, and I followed her to the fitting room. When I slipped the dress over my shoulders, the fabric melted into my skin like it belonged there. I looked at myself in the mirror, the neckline elegant but modest, the fabric flowing like liquid light. For the first time in years, I didn't see lack. I saw potential. When I stepped out, the woman's eyes softened even more. "It suits you," she said quietly. It was meant to be worn by someone with grace, not greed. I laughed nervously. "I wish I could afford it." She studied me for a moment, then disappeared into the back again. When she returned, she carried a small envelope. "The designer who made that dress," she began, "used to sell a few of her early works here. Before fame found her. She stopped selling publicly years ago. Her name's Lydia Caro. My breath caught. Lydia Caro was practically fashion royalty. Her designs adorned actresses, heiresses, and socialites. You mean the Lydia Caro? The woman nodded. That label inside is her signature, from her private line before she started her brand. It's authentic. And if you're wondering why it's here, it's because not every treasure is meant for those who can easily buy it. I looked down at the dress, stunned. It was like holding a secret piece of the world's beauty that no one else knew existed. I can't pay full price, I admitted, my voice small. She nodded again, as though she had expected that. Then pay what you can. Consider it fate doing you a favor. That night, I emptied my savings. Every penny I had tucked away for emergencies, for groceries, for next month's rent. I handed it over, my hands trembling, and walked out with the gown folded carefully in tissue paper. When I got home, I hung it in my closet and just stared at it. It wasn't the kind of dress you wear to impress. It was the kind you wear to become something. I promised myself it would be for Emily's wedding. My way of showing the world that I wasn't the struggling artist they thought I was, that I had built something of my own. But the truth behind that dress, what it cost me, went far deeper than money. A week after I bought it, my landlord handed me a notice. Rent increase. I was already behind, and now I was drowning. I tried to sell some of my designs online, staying up late sketching clothes I couldn't afford to produce. My fingertips were blistered from sewing, my eyes burned from sleepless nights. And when my mother called asking if I could send some money for her medication, I lied. I told her work was slow. I told her I was fine. That lie haunted me, because I knew the reason she couldn't refill her prescription that month was hanging in my closet. The night before the wedding, I sat on my bed staring at the dress, guilt wrapping around me like the same fabric I'd once adored. My roommate, Claire, walked in holding 2 cups of tea. She noticed my expression. You're thinking about the cost again, aren't you? I nodded weakly. I shouldn't have bought it. It's selfish. She set the tea down and looked me in the eye. No. You've spent your whole life giving, to your mom, to your job, to everyone but yourself. This isn't selfish. It's a statement. You earned this. Her words sat heavy but comforting. Still, when I slipped into the dress the next morning, I could feel the weight of every sacrifice woven into the seams. At the wedding, the world saw satin and grace. They didn't see the struggle, the sleepless nights, the bills, the tears. They didn't see the girl who used to patch her clothes because buying new ones was a luxury. They saw what they wanted, a girl trying too hard to look expensive. And Mrs. Harrington saw her favorite target, an outsider pretending to belong. What she didn't know was that my guilt was slowly turning into resolve. Every snide remark she threw my way only made me more certain that I'd made the right choice. I had spent years being quiet, being humble, being grateful for scraps. But standing in that room, under chandeliers and crystal glass, I realized that humility and shame are not the same thing. So when she mocked me about the fabric again during dinner, I didn't shrink this time. I smiled and said, "Funny thing about appearances, sometimes the value's hidden where only a few can recognize it." She smirked, thinking I was bluffing, her laughter ringing out like polished cruelty. But I knew the truth was coming. The label, the one she so desperately wanted to see, was more powerful than anything I could have said. The dress I couldn't afford had already cost me too much. But soon it was about to pay for itself, in pride, in silence, in poetic justice. Because when the time came, when the truth revealed itself in front of everyone, it wouldn't just be a dress anymore. It would be a weapon. And Mrs. Harrington, she would never laugh the same way again. The moment arrived quietly, so quietly, in fact, that no one realized what was about to happen. The string lights above the ballroom shimmered like captured stars, the band played soft jazz, and laughter echoed off the marble floors. Emily and Daniel had already shared their first dance, and the party had melted into that dreamy, wine-fueled haze where everyone pretends to be their best selves. Everyone except Mrs. Harrington. She was still watching me. From across the room, between her smiles and sips of champagne, her eyes flickered toward me like a hawk keeping track of prey. I could feel it, the unspoken challenge, the same one she'd thrown my way earlier when she mocked my dress and demanded proof of its worth. I hadn't forgotten her words. The real test is in the label. She didn't know that those words were about to undo her. When the speeches ended and the waiters began serving dinner, Emily approached me, glowing in her ivory gown. "You look so beautiful, Mia," she said warmly, grabbing my hands. "I'm so glad you're here. It wouldn't have felt right without you." Her sincerity caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw the same Emily I'd grown up with, the one who shared sandwiches with me at lunch when I couldn't afford my own, the one who promised that money would never matter between us. I wanted to believe her, but behind her, I could see her mother watching, lips curved into that condescending smirk, and the warmth in my chest froze over again. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world," I replied, my voice steady. A few moments later, Mrs. Harrington approached, her perfume arriving before she did. "Oh, there you are," she said, all sugar and venom. "Emily, darling, have you seen Mia's dress up close? It's something." Emily frowned, glancing between us. "Mom, please, I'm just teasing," Mrs. Harrington interrupted. "You know me, I just love fashion. I was only saying how bold it was for Mia to wear satin. It can be so unforgiving." Her friends snickered again from the nearby table. I could see their perfectly glossed lips curl into judgmental smiles. Something in me snapped. Not loudly, not visibly. It was more like a quiet switch flipping inside, the end of restraint. "You're right," I said, forcing a polite smile. "Satin can be unforgiving, especially to those who don't understand what they're looking at." Her laughter faltered. "Oh, and what exactly are we looking at?" I could have let it go. I could have swallowed my pride like I'd done 100 times before. But not this time. I reached for the edge of the gown near my hip, gently parting the fold where the inner tag rested. The lighting caught the silver lettering, glinting like truth finally set free. El Caro Atelier. The moment the label came into view, the air seemed to thicken. Mrs. Harrington leaned in, squinting. Then her smile collapsed. Emily blinked. "Wait, is that?" "Yes," I said quietly, not breaking eye contact with her mother. "It's an original Lydia Caro. One of her early collection pieces. Vintage. Hand-stitched. You could have heard a pin drop." Mrs. Harrington's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The color drained from her face as realization sank in. Around us, whispers began to ripple through the crowd, guests leaning closer, murmuring Lydia Caro name like a revelation. In a room full of people who prided themselves on knowing luxury, everyone understood what that label meant. The dress wasn't just expensive, it was history. A piece so rare that even collectors couldn't easily find one. One of her friends, clearly recognizing the name, gasped softly. "Lydia Caro? As in the Caro? My God, I thought she retired her private line decades ago." Mrs. Harrington's hands trembled slightly as she lifted her glass. Her voice, once so sharp, was now paper-thin. "Well, I suppose I didn't realize." "No," I said, smiling faintly. "You didn't." For the first time that evening, the power shifted. I could feel it, the weight of every humiliating moment I'd endured, every patronizing word she'd ever thrown at me, melting away like frost under sunlight. She had mocked me for not belonging, and now, in front of everyone, she stood exposed, shallow, snobbish, and wrong. Emily looked at her mother, disappointment flickering across her face. "Mom, seriously? Why would you say anything about her dress in the first place?" Mrs. Harrington tried to recover, forcing out a brittle laugh. "Oh, darling, I was only joking." "No, you weren't," Emily interrupted, her voice firm. "You've done this before. You always act like you're above everyone. I didn't notice it when I was younger, but I see it now." The tension cracked the air. People were pretending not to stare, but they were all listening. Even Daniel's father glanced over from the bar, brow furrowed. I didn't want a scene. I didn't need revenge in the form of spectacle. What I wanted, what I needed, was to let her sit in the silence she had earned. So I smiled softly and said, "It's okay, Mrs. Harrington. You were right earlier. The real test is in the label. And sometimes, labels tell more about the people looking at them than the ones wearing them." Her jaw tightened. "You're quite clever, aren't you?" "I've had to be," I said quietly, then excused myself before she could respond. I walked away, leaving her standing there in her expensive jewels and cheap pride. Behind me, I heard Emily whisper something sharp to her mother, something that ended with the word apologize. I didn't look back. Outside, the night air was cool and merciful. I stood under the fairy lights strung across the garden, finally breathing freely. The laughter inside faded into a distant hum, and I felt the weight of the past months, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the guilt begin to lift. A few minutes later, Emily joined me. Her mascara had smudged slightly, and she looked torn between anger and sadness. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "She had no right to treat you that way." "It's not your fault," I said gently. "She's just used to a world that measures worth by money." Emily shook her head. "Then she's the one who's poor." That made me smile. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. Before she went back inside, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "I heard she's going to make a donation to your art fund." Maybe guilt finally got through. I laughed softly. Or embarrassment. When the night ended, I didn't stay for the farewell photos or the final toasts. I walked home barefoot, heels dangling from my fingers, the satin of my dress brushing against my legs with every step. Under the moonlight, it shimmered, quiet, dignified, unapologetic. By the time I reached my apartment, I realized something profound. That dress, once a symbol of sacrifice and insecurity, had transformed into something else entirely. It wasn't about the label anymore, not about Lydia Caro, not about fashion or validation. It was about the truth that had always been there. Value isn't about cost, it's about character. Months later, I received a small envelope in the mail. Inside was a handwritten note, and signed, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Sometimes silence teaches more than words ever can. "I'm sorry. H." I folded the note and tucked it into the same box where I kept the receipt for the dress. A quiet reminder of the night I learned that dignity doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stand tall and let the world reveal itself. The laughter that once haunted me had long faded. And though the bride's mother had mocked my dress that day, in the end it was the label.